They called it a revolution for freedom. A fight against tyranny. A rise of the people. The birth of modern democracy. But behind the slogans, behind the speeches, behind the banners that promised equality, there was blood. So much blood that the streets of Paris ran red. This is not the heroic version of the French Revolution. This is the story of what really happened when power changed hands. And humanity disappeared. In the late 18th century, France was collapsing. The country was rich, but the people were starving. The monarchy lived in luxury while common citizens struggled to survive. Bread was expensive. Jobs were rare. Taxes crushed the poor. Anger grew quietly at first. Then it exploded. In 1789, the French people rose up against King Louis XVI. They demanded liberty. They demanded equality. They demanded justice. And at first, the world watched with hope. The Bastille fell. The monarchy weakened. The people believed a new age had begun. But revolutions do not stop once they begin. They evolve. And often, they devour themselves. As the old order collapsed, fear took its place. The revolutionaries were terrified of enemies. Enemies within. Enemies outside. Enemies imagined. Anyone who questioned the revolution was suspected of treason. And in times of fear, suspicion becomes deadly. Political groups formed. Radical voices grew louder. Moderation became dangerous. To hesitate was to betray. To disagree was to die. The idea of freedom slowly transformed into something darker. Something absolute. Then came the guillotine. At first, it was presented as a humane invention. A quick death. An equal death. No torture. No suffering. But soon, it became a symbol of terror. Executions became public spectacles. Crowds gathered. Children watched. Vendors sold food as heads fell. Death became entertainment. And the blade never rested. The revolution entered its most infamous phase. The Reign of Terror. From 1793 to 1794, France was ruled not by law, but by fear. The Committee of Public Safety took control. Its most powerful voice was a man named Maximilien Robespierre. He believed that terror was not a crime. He believed it was a duty. According to him, violence was necessary to protect the revolution. Virtue, he said, must be defended by terror. And so the killing began. Anyone could be accused. Nobles. Priests. Farmers. Women. Even fellow revolutionaries. A careless word. A suspicious look. A past connection. That was enough. Trials lasted minutes. Evidence was optional. Verdicts were predetermined. Guilt was assumed. And the guillotine waited. Paris became a city of executions. Carts rolled through the streets daily, carrying the condemned. Mothers. Fathers. Teenagers. Elderly men. Some cried. Some prayed. Some went silent. The crowd cheered anyway. Because fear had turned people into spectators. And once people grow used to death, it becomes normal. The numbers are staggering. In less than a year, over 40,000 people were executed. Thousands more died in prisons. Many were killed without trial. Entire regions were purged. In the Vade, government forces massacred civilians. Villages were burned. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. Some historians describe it as one of the first modern genocides. All in the name of freedom. The revolution had begun by fighting tyranny. But now, it had become one. The leaders who preached equality lived in fear of their own allies. No one was safe. Not even Robespierre himself. Eventually, the terror turned inward. Robespierre was accused of betraying the revolution. He was arrested, tried, and executed. The same guillotine he had used so often ended his life as well. The crowd cheered once more. The cycle was complete. When the terror ended, France was exhausted. The monarchy was gone. But peace did not come. The country was traumatized. Economically ruined. Morally shattered. Out of the chaos would rise a new figure. A general. A conqueror. A man who promised order. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. And his rise would mark the end of the revolution's ideals. And the beginning of something else entirely. The French Revolution is often remembered as the birth of modern democracy. But its darker truth is rarely discussed. It proved that ideals, when taken to extremes, can become weapons. That justice can become revenge. That freedom, without restraint, can turn into terror. And that the line between liberation and destruction is far thinner than we like to believe. When the executions did not stop, people began to realize something terrifying. The revolution no longer had a direction. It only had momentum. And momentum, once fueled by fear, is almost impossible to stop. By 1793, France was no longer ruled by law or reason. It was ruled by suspicion. Everyone watched everyone. Neighbors reported neighbors. Friends betrayed friends. A careless sentence could cost a life. A rumor could send someone to the guillotine. The revolution had created a society where silence meant survival. The Committee of Public Safety claimed it was protecting the Republic. But in truth, it had become its executioner. Robespierre and his allies believed that terror was necessary. They argued that fear would cleanse the nation. That violence would purify society. That death was a tool of justice. And many believed them. Because fear has a way of sounding like logic. The Revolutionary Tribunal worked day and night. Trials were short. Defense was meaningless. Verdicts were nearly always the same. Guilty. The accused were not criminals in the traditional sense. They were former revolutionaries, political rivals, clergy, farmers, intellectuals, ordinary citizens. Anyone who seemed insufficiently loyal could be condemned. Even silence could be interpreted as opposition. The guillotine became the symbol of the age. Not just a machine of death, but a symbol of equality. Kings and beggars died the same way. That was the justification. But repetition turned execution into routine. Heads fell so often that the crowd stopped reacting. Blood became ordinary. Death became entertainment. Children played near the scaffold. Vendors sold snacks. Music played as bodies fell. This was no longer justice. It was desensitization. Outside Paris, the violence was even worse. In the Vade region, peasants rebelled against the revolution. They were met with absolute brutality. Entire villages were burned. Civilians were massacred. Women and children were executed. Some were drowned in mass killings. Others were locked in churches and burned alive. The revolutionary government called it pacification. History would later call it mass murder. The irony was cruel. The revolution that promised liberty had become one of the most oppressive regimes in Europe. The same people who once demanded freedom now lived in constant fear. And the architects of terror began to sense that they themselves were no longer safe. Because revolutions devour their own. Robespierre grew paranoid. He believed enemies surrounded him. He saw betrayal everywhere. He demanded more executions. But the more people he killed, the more isolated he became. Even his allies feared him. And fear, once turned inward, becomes deadly. In July 1794, the tide turned. Robespierre was arrested by his fellow revolutionaries. He tried to defend himself. He tried to speak. But this time, no one listened. The man who sent thousands to their deaths was silenced. The next day, he was taken to the same guillotine. The crowd watched in silence. Some cheered. Some wept. Most felt only exhaustion. The terror was over. But the damage was irreversible. France emerged from the revolution broken. The monarchy was gone. The old system was destroyed. But what replaced it was chaos. The people were traumatized. The economy was shattered. Trust was gone. Out of this exhaustion rose a new figure. A general. A strategist. A man who promised order. Napoleon Bonaparte. The revolution that began with dreams of equality ended with an empire. History had come full circle. The French Revolution is often remembered as the birth of modern freedom. But its darker side tells another story. It shows how quickly ideals can become weapons. How easily justice becomes revenge. How fast people accept violence when they believe it serves a greater good. It proves one terrifying truth. The greatest horrors in history are not committed by monsters, but by people who believe they are right. And perhaps that is the most disturbing lesson of all. Because the French Revolution did not fail due to evil intentions. It failed because fear replaced humanity. And when fear becomes law, no one is safe. When the terror finally ended, France stood silent. Not in peace, but in exhaustion. The streets that once echoed with revolutionary chants were now filled with grief. Families were gone. Trust was gone. Hope was fragile. The revolution had destroyed the old world. But it had not yet built a new one. The years following the terror were unstable. Governments rose and collapsed. Corruption returned. Poverty remained. The people who had demanded freedom were now desperate for order. And history has shown us something important. When people are exhausted by chaos, they will accept almost anything in exchange for stability. That was when Napoleon Bonaparte appeared. Napoleon did not rise through ideals. He rose through fatigue. The people no longer wanted debates. They no longer wanted speeches. They wanted someone who could end the chaos. And Napoleon promised exactly that. He brought discipline. He restored order. He silenced opposition. And slowly, quietly, the revolution ended where it began. With absolute power in the hands of one man. The irony is impossible to ignore. A revolution that began to destroy monarchy ended by creating an emperor. The same people who cheered the fall of a king now bowed to another. The French Revolution did not fail because its ideals were wrong. It failed because humans are fragile. Fear corrupts. Power tempts. Violence escalates. And once violence becomes acceptable, it never stops where you expect it to. The legacy of the French Revolution is deeply conflicted. On one hand, human rights. Equality before the law. The idea of citizenship. Democracy itself. On the other, mass executions. Political purges. State-sanctioned terror. The normalization of death. Both are true. And that is what makes this history so disturbing. The revolution taught the world a dangerous lesson. That morality can be suspended in the name of progress. That people can justify anything, if they believe they are building a better future. And once that belief takes hold, the guillotine is never far behind. The men who carried out the terror did not believe they were evil. They believed they were necessary. They believed history would thank them. Instead, history remembers them as a warning. Today, the French Revolution is celebrated in textbooks. But its darker side is often softened. Because it forces us to confront something uncomfortable. That ordinary people, under the right conditions, can become executioners. That justice can become cruelty. That freedom can become oppression. And that the line between hero and villain is far thinner than we like to admit. The revolution did not simply change France. It changed the world. It showed future generations what mass movements could do. Both for good and for unimaginable harm. Every modern revolution carries its shadow. Every cry for freedom carries a risk. Because history has proven one thing again and again. When anger replaces reason, and ideology replaces humanity, the result is never liberation. Only blood. And so, the French Revolution remains one of history's greatest paradoxes. A symbol of hope. And a lesson in horror. A reminder that the fight for justice must never lose its humanity. Because once it does, the revolution is already lost.